So, thank you, Jenny, for joining us to chat about your experiences of Out of the Box in schools. Can you just introduce yourself to start with, please?
Okay, so my name's Jenny Fytche. I work in England and I work with primary age children for a Christian charity. And our role is to go into schools to help with well-being and to help with the spiritual aspect of the life of any school, whether it's a church school or a state school.
Great. And you sent me some photos of some of the experiences. I know you do this a lot, don't you? You've been doing this since I think June last year, so
Yeah,
nearly a
yeah.
year, and quite a lot of times a week. Is that right? You've done.
Yes, I go into 7 schools specifically doing out of the box on a regular sort of booking. And so, yes, up to 5 or 6 times a week. So we have a lot of fun and it's interesting to see what the children benefit from it. Actually.
Great. I think of all the people, you've had the most experience of using Out of the Box in schools. So
I'm
we've
sure
just had
others will
to
catch up very soon.
we've just had to just take a few of your experiences, and you've got some photos that you sent me. So I'm just going to share these now.
So this was a group of 10-year-olds. And I told the story of the idea. And afterwards, in the community play part of Out of the Box, the children changed the landscape to have a safe space to keep the idea. So the idea couldn't be taken away or broken or changed, but it would have a place where it could go and grow with a person looking after it. Which I thought was an interesting idea.
Oh, sorry, I went on too quickly there. Sorry. So is that the person in the box there that we can
That's the
see who's
person
looking after
lying
the
down in
idea?
the box, yes. And they put green leaves around it because they wanted it to be a place that was nurturing and growing. And there was just one person, if you notice, one person is just with animals and birds. And another person joined her, but the figure represented what she would want to do with the idea. And she didn't want it to be in a box. She wanted it to be out in the open with all of nature. So she went and did her own thing in another part. Yeah.
Great. So they didn't all have to agree together, that they could have differences, different ideas all in the same picture.
Yeah, they had different ideas, but they all talked together and they all negotiated together. And what was fascinating in one part was they all started talking about the values they held as a class and as a school and wove the values in, which was interesting as well, that they started to join up lots of aspects of school life. And it was springboarding across the whole of their school day as a story. Yeah.
Great. Shall I show the next one to do with the idea of the story as well?
Yes, this was the next part of their story. They completely changed the landscape and in their community play, turned the landscape into a classroom. And they just sat their important exams there. In Britain, we call them SATs in year 6, where they have to sit behind one desk on their own. And they all together joined in with imagining what would happen if their ideas took flight during that test and knocked the teacher over. As you can see, she's fallen backwards. And the whiteboard that they created with the blocks and the white square has completely fallen over. And I think that probably was their sort of expression and processing their experience of doing testing that week in a very fun way. Yeah. The teacher found it very amusing when she saw it.
I love the subversiveness of Out of the Box.
It was great. That was a really good moment.
That's lovely. Great. Okay. Oh, this is different.
Yes, this is a very different story, a very busy community play. So this was last Christmas, and this was a story told to some 9-year-olds in a special needs school. And they're all boys, and they all have a different learning difficulty, and some have some physical difficulties as well, so can't go into ordinary education. Some of them are very intelligent, but need to be in a different form of education. So we told the Christmas story, and afterwards this was their community play, and they added the donkey. That was the first thing. They felt it needed to have a donkey as part of their play. They added the sheep, but they had them lying down because they needed to rest after a journey. They had other things, trees and flowers. They wanted it to be a happy, bright place. And they also put a man, if you see at the top of the screen, in a rocket going off to the moon, which they told me was Jesus. And sometimes Jesus was going up back to heaven, and sometimes he was turned around coming back to earth. So their understanding of the Christmas nativity was really good. But what was brilliant about this community time was, for a group of children who were told couldn't work together, they did. I just got out of the way, and this is what they created together, and then told me how they'd changed the ending of the story. And both myself and the classroom teacher were very moved by that expression, and the way that had happened in a very joyful moment, which doesn't often happen in that classroom because of all their different needs.
A wonderful example of how Out of the Box, which comes from Deep Talk, which is all about dialogue, how we dialogue with each other, how we are with each other. That's a great example. And yet, so this person who's representing Jesus at the bottom with a star on him in the rocket, yes, I can see. And the star, what was the star?
The star was about God being light, and God was in all things. And if you see, they've scattered stars throughout.
Oh gosh, so theologizing going on there as well.
Yes, and none of us knew that this one particular child could do that, but he quite clearly could, and it was great. He told us exactly what it meant.
Oh, wow. Thank you. And on to the next one. Oh.
Okay, now this was a class in a different school, a much younger group of children who are about age 6. In a primary school, and I told the story of the starfish, which is where a person throws one starfish back in the sea, one at a time. But in the community play, they again all decided to work together for the well-being of the starfish and all starfish. So they put clouds in the sky to have it cooler and to have rain to keep the starfish wet. They created a chain with a bucket that passed down the chain on a plank of wood down to the sea to put them in. They had rafts of pathways going into the sea, and they even had a sheep with stars on his back carrying things to the sea. So they really worked together. They also grew a tree because they felt the tree would create shade for some starfish. So they really were shown a lot of care for these starfish. They were shown a lot of care in how they could work together. And again, for children so young, they were able to think about how they were going to do that well. And it wasn't, they dialogued together well again, and they talked about how to be a good team into saving the starfish, which we thought again was really good.
And the grey blobs and the blue dots?
Grey blobs are the clouds, and the blue circles are the rain, keeping the starfish wet and not drying out in the sun while they're waiting for the tide to come in. So a lot of creativity went into that community play.
Thank you. All right. So, well, thank you, Jenny. So much creativity that's going on in all the classes that you're with. And are you working with whole classes or smaller groups?
I've done some whole class work, particularly maybe at the end of the day, I'll go in and the children will sit in a circle and I will tell a story. Sometimes it's small groups of children, and I've been working in particular with refugee children, to begin with the Afghan refugees that came in and were being integrated into our schools. And we had some very moving community playtimes, which I haven't got pictures for because to hold it was quite fragile at times. There's a lot of emotion for all of us in the room as some of these Afghan refugees told their stories. One story, I can't remember which one it was that I told, it gave them the freedom to create a house that they would like to live in, but also to build aeroplanes out of other objects in the classroom, Lego and building blocks, to show how they came out of the airports in Afghanistan and how the planes rescued them. And what it did was it gave the other children in that small group from their classes the opportunity to really empathise with them, to understand their story, and for it to be a very safe and brave space where they could share together. And afterwards, the class teacher was saying how much that had integrated all the relationships within that classroom. There wasn't Afghans versus the other children. They were all children together that were supporting and helping each other, which was just lovely. So that was one story. There was another time where one child who's beginning to show signs of real trauma from coming out of Afghanistan, and it was a starfish story again, but he didn't want to work in a team, and he didn't want to save the starfish, and he didn't want other people working there, so he became a soldier and his figure was a soldier, and he built a tower to stand on, and then he ordered other people to kill the starfish and to kill other people on the landscape. And we held that and we worked on it and we recovered it, but it also gave the classroom teacher the insight to be able to go and the evidence for him to go and get additional help. So his well-being could be supported within school. So that was a real threshold moment for him, I think, and for the classroom as a whole.
And how did the class respond to that?
The children listened. And then once he left, because we needed to remove him to another part of the classroom with the teaching assistant, we then talked about his experience leaving Afghanistan, and they wondered what that would be like. So I didn't direct, they just wondered, and then they rebuilt the story. They said, well, actually, it would be much better if we all came back and we carried on saving the starfish. So they sort of restored and healed what had happened in a very helpful way.
So when we say, you know, your story, my story, our story, let's be curious about this story, that the children are bringing their own stories into this. I'm hearing this time and time again today and with other people talking. And if children can tell their stories to each other, then the empathy and compassion and
the relational trust, I call it, relational trust in the classroom can be built, which is so important, I think.
Thank you.
There was one other little girl I could tell you about, and she comes from she's British, she comes from a very difficult home background, and she'd been all the way through school and never quite fitted in, and was always the person in trouble, always a person staying in at playtime, always a person whose parents had to come in. And I told the story of the donkey, and the donkey that bit and kicked, and you know, there is another way round, as I think the words. And at the end of that, and the end of the community play, she just came to me afterwards and she said, I've got it. And I thought, oh, I said, I wonder what you've got. And she said, I'm the donkey. I'm the donkey, and I could do it differently. And then school would be fine and everybody would be happy. And I just left it at that. And then the following week, the teaching assistant came to me and she goes, what did you do in that session? So I told her, and she said, This particular child has not been in trouble for a whole week, and that's the first time ever.
Mm.
And something shifted in her that's helped her well-being, her education, her socialization, everything. And I was back in that school a few weeks ago, and it has continued. And she's going on into secondary school in a much better place than she would have done. Now, I'm sure other people have put other input in, but that was the moment where her story and that story came together in a helpful way for her.
Mm.
Yeah.
It's interesting, and she maybe needed to discover it for herself as well. Mm.
She owned it for herself, and she could see herself as the difficult donkey, she called it.
Yeah.
Mm.
Oh, what stories of hope and transformation they are.
Absolutely, and it's a real privilege to share them with children.
Yeah.
Build the communities. Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Jenny. Is there anything else that you wanted to say before we finish?
No, I think that's fine. I could talk forever, but I think
we'll have you on again, Jenny.
I think that's plenty for today.
Well, thank you so much.
Okay.
It's really lovely to hear all the work that you're doing in schools throughout the box, and all of the other things that like you say, it's not just out of the box, it's other approaches that working together. I know some of your schools, I think, are into restorative justice as well, and I think it's all coming together to enable the children to flourish.
It's the well-being emphasis in our schools, and we're just there at the right time, at the right moment, and it is all coming together.
Thank you, Jenny.
Okay.